Hey everybody, it is Thursday, November 21st. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to.
Moshe, a very happy half birthday to you.
Oh, thanks for remembering, Jill. Before the pod, sometimes folks were like, what are we going to talk about at the top? And sometimes it's totally spur of the moment. We just, I don't know, something strikes our fancy. And just before recording this, I was like, what do we got? And I was like, oh, you know what November 21st is? My half birthday. So, though, Jill, you totally would have remembered.
Of course. I barely know my half birthday. I barely know the date, as you know. I'm horrible with dates.
I feel like a 4-year-old. I'm like, I'm not 4, I'm 4.5.
So I think I've mentioned this. My husband's family is very into half birthdays, and he's actually kind of into half birthdays too, because his half birthday is leap year. So he's August 29th, so his half birthday is February.
So he only gets celebrated every 4 years on the actual date.
Correct.
Wow. Michael, we learn new things about you every day. Anyway, I take all gifts via my Instagram. I kid. I don't need
oh my God.
Have birthday gifts. Halfway around the sun this year for me.
Oh my God. Okay, Dad.
Well, you know, we
it's
go from
another
counting,
year around the sun.
We as the father now, we go from counting weeks old to months old, and then the transition from months old to years old, and so it's nice to mark the more smaller milestones still.
I more meant the halfway around the sun comment. I feel like that's a dad joke, or not even a joke, but like another year around the sun.
Yeah, no, I will say my dad humor is above that, Jill. I got some jokes up my sleeve.
I know. We laugh on this podcast every day. All right, guys, let's get to some news. Hard to believe, but we are 1 week from Thanksgiving. Everything you need to know about the upcoming travel weekend, including the price of your Thanksgiving meal. It also comes as severe weather hits the West Coast in the form of a bomb cyclone. American businesses are trying to prep for Donald Trump's second term in office, and that means stocking up on supplies and other goods ahead of expected tariffs. In other political news, what the Ethics Committee decided about whether or not to release the findings of their investigation into former Congressman Matt Gaetz, and how Texas is looking to help Donald Trump with his plans for the mass deportation of migrants, a verdict in the Laken Riley case in Georgia. In tech news, why some are calling for a Manhattan Project for AI. Overseas, 45 Hong Kong pro-democracy leaders are behind bars. We'll tell you why. And looking back at Arthur Fromer, the man whose travel guides inspired people to travel the world on the cheap.
We'll tell you about the story of how he first started his first travel guide.
Plus Moshe is on this day in history.
Tell me if you know these lyrics. Love to eat turkey at the table. I once saw a movie with Betty Grable.
Turkey for me, turkey for you.
Classic SNL sketch. You sort of had to be there in the 90s.
We were.
We were. Back when you bought comedy CDs and tapes. We'll have more on that and on this day in history.
Okay, it is almost the holidays, so Moshe, we'd be remiss if we didn't start by telling people who will be traveling to pack their patience.
Your patience, everybody. Make sure you got room for it.
The TSA and Triple... For anyone who's new to this podcast, just FYI, this is one of Moshe and I's TV pet peeves.
But we fully embraced it here.
Yes, we now use it more than anybody on TV, but kind of jokingly, but not, I think, at this point.
No, at this point, we're totally embracing it. Ironically, we're embracing Pack Your Patience. But get ready for it. If you're watching any local news or listening to radio over the next week, you will hear at least once some local reporter, and we tell you, they don't teach this in journalism school. It just somehow gets into the water in a newsroom. You cover a holiday travel story, and you're like, everyone, time to pack your patience.
All right, so the TSA and AAA expect that Thanksgiving travel is going to break records this year. About 80 million people are expected to venture more than 50 miles away from home for the Thanksgiving holiday. That's about 1.7 million more than last year's record-shattering figure and a 2.5% increase from 2019's pre-pandemic numbers. It comes as some rough weather is hitting both coasts. On the East Coast, some much-needed rain finally hitting the region, which has been dealing with drought. But on the West Coast, back-to-back storms battered the Pacific Northwest, killing at least 2 people near Seattle. More than 500,000 homes and businesses were left in the dark on Wednesday. The system is what's called a bomb cyclone because of the quick drop in pressure, adding to its power. It brought snow, freezing rain, and blizzard conditions across parts of Washington. Back to holiday travel, the busiest holiday travel days are projected to be Tuesday and Wednesday before the big meal, and then Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday afterward. So the TSA is preparing to screen about 18 million people boarding flights. And despite a 3% increase in domestic ticket prices from last Thanksgiving, bookings, if you could believe it, are up 23%. That's a lot, Moshe.
People are on the move, Jill.
And a reminder from the TSA, gravy, cranberry sauce, jams, preserves, all need to be in a 3.4-ounce container to be allowed on the plane. So
if you have a big Thanksgiving dinner, just like have a whole bag of 3.4-ounce containers of gravy.
If your family is relying on you to bring the cranberry sauce on the plane, pack wisely.
Ship it. I think that sounds like a FedEx thing.
And for people who are driving to their destination, average gas prices are under $3 a gallon, a drop from last year's $3.26 on average.
Yeah, gas super cheap. Most parts of the country. Sorry, California, not you. Traffic will be the heaviest on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon. Thanksgiving Day expected to be quieter. Jill, as you listed the dates there of like the busiest travel days are Tuesday, Wednesday, Sunday, Monday. Basically, if you don't travel by this upcoming Monday, you'll be on one of the busiest days. Otherwise, you got to go on Thanksgiving Day itself and then leave by Saturday. Or otherwise, you're going to be hitting all these busy travel days. So just, again, take your time and prepare for traffic and or long lines at the airport, or however you're getting to your destination. Also, an alternative is just leaving super early or leaving super late. Now, when it comes to the big meal, according to the estimates, food is slightly cheaper this year than previous holidays. According to an annual survey here I'm reading about, the price of a 16-pound turkey is $25.67 on average. That is 6% less than last year. And then, Jill, get this from the American Farm Bureau Federation. A classic Thanksgiving feast for a party of 10 people, they claim, will cost $58, down 5% from last year. $58 to feed a party of 10. They claim that includes a turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, dinner rolls, frozen peas, fresh cranberries, celery, carrots, pumpkin pie mix and crust, whipped cream, and whole milk. What grocery store are these people going to?
None near me, that's for sure.
Party of 10? $58? That's amazing. American Farm Bureau Federation, if one of you is listening to this podcast, please reach out. I'd like to know how you guys come up with those numbers. But that said, even by their standards, the price of a Thanksgiving meal, the classic meal, all the trimmings I just listed there, still up 20% from just before COVID.
Okay, Moshe, now to politics and how it could impact the economy. American businesses are stockpiling imported goods ahead of President-elect Trump's taking office in January. There are big concerns that he's going to enact severe tariffs on foreign goods. Trump campaigned on a 10 to 20% tariff on imports from all countries and a 60% or higher tariff on goods from China. The U.S. imports most goods from China, which is the world's top exporter. American businesses purchased about $430 billion worth of Chinese products last year, mostly computers and electronics. So now companies are planning for big changes, including reducing their dependence on China and shifting manufacturing operations to other regions. A reminder, tariffs aren't usually paid by exporters. Those costs are actually passed along to companies here in the U.S. that are buying parts or products. And then those companies typically pass the costs on to consumers in the way of higher prices.
We've been hearing from a number of people in the Manus community who own businesses or work in businesses that say, yeah, we're stocking up on like a year's worth of stuff right now from China in anticipation of this. Some of you work in the apparel or textile or fashion industry. There's currently a 10% tariff on all textiles, apparel, and footwear from China or with parts or materials that come from China. So if you've noticed your clothes have gotten more expensive, like most things have gotten more expensive, one of the reasons clothes have gotten extra expensive there is partially due to the tariffs that have been imposed by Trump initially and kept by Biden. Now, they're concerned that tariff will go up even higher. And so your Nikes and various apparel and clothing that you might purchase will go up higher there. Right now, the estimates for S&P companies, this is the 500 largest companies, they estimate that a 60% tariff on goods could reduce company earnings by 3.5% next year. That's according to Barclays. That has many on Wall Street not believing that Trump's actually going to go so far with his tariff plan, even though Trump has called tariffs the most beautiful word in the English language. More beautiful than love is what he used to say on the campaign trail. At the same time, for Trump, the stock market is a huge gauge for him, whether he's doing the right thing. And a stock market sell-off, if he actually went ahead with tariffs here, would be imminent. That leads some folks, including folks who know a lot about Wall Street and business, including Jamie Dimon, the head of the largest bank in the world, JP Morgan. He doesn't think Trump's going full tariff. He thinks he's going to use it as a leveraging position. Trump has implied this, by the way. I've talked about 500% tariffs, 2,000% tariffs, whatever it takes to get China to do what I want them to do and make more fair trade deals with the U.S. So as far as some folks on Wall Street, the belief and the reason why you see stocks where they are right now, they're still up from Election Day, not as high as you saw the first week after the election, but still high, is they don't actually think these things are going to happen, but they are preparing for it. I had a conversation on Wednesday with Sarah Eisen from CNBC. We'll have that conversation out there for Mo News Premium listeners on Friday. If you're not a premium listener, go check it out, mo.news/premium. We break down the issue, and she spoke with me about what CEOs are telling her about how they're looking at Trump policies, what they're bullish on, and what they're concerned about.
All right, a couple of other quick political headlines to mention. The House Ethics Committee met Wednesday, but did not release its report on former Representative Matt Gaetz. And that is despite significant pressure after Trump picked him for Attorney General. The ethics chair telling reporters after the meeting that, quote, there is not an agreement by the committee to release the report. The panel met behind closed doors for a couple of hours. There are reports that they took multiple votes, including one to release the report as is. So that one failed. There was another vote to publish just the exhibits associated with the report. That also failed. And then a third to formally complete the report, which passed in bipartisan fashion.
Right. So there's a draft report. It's close to final. So they're going to go ahead and complete the report. They're going to meet again on December 5th. This committee, by the way, for those unfamiliar, they have an ethics committee that investigates itself. 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. And so they will look into issues of their own. There's 435 members of Congress. There's 435 members of the House. And so the Ethics Committee looks into issues internally as far as potentially members of Congress misbehaving. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, regardless of what the committee decides here, details from the report could make their way to the public. And by could, I mean have. Jill, as of this recording on Wednesday night, the New York Times has already gotten some of those exhibits that they voted not to release. Somehow, someone released them to the New York Times. We have a couple of them posted on the Mo News Instagram account. It shows, and a couple of the charts that they have, a trail of payments from Matt Gaetz to women, including some of whom testified that Gaetz hired them for sex. This is according to a couple of the documents you can find on the New York Times website. These documents were assembled during the 3-year House ethics investigation. It shows a web of thousands of dollars that Gaetz spent on Venmo to a group of his friends, associates, that then went to the women for these drug-fueled sex parties that he went to as a member of Congress in his 30s between 2017 and 2020 with young women. Now, it doesn't show specifically, and this is probably why DOJ wasn't able to pursue criminal charges, a direct link between the 17-year-old girl in question in Gaetz, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence in terms of how he labeled the Venmo payments, who that went to, the same amount then going from that person to the women here. Nonetheless, expect to see more of this, despite what the Ethics Committee votes, because clearly someone or someone's are leaking exhibits and details from it on a near hourly basis as I watch the headlines here. At the same time, you got Gaetz on Capitol Hill yesterday. He was up there with VP-elect J.D. Vance, formerly senator, or currently still senator of Ohio, J.D. Vance, but about to be vice president. J.D. Vance sort of chaperoning him around the Senate there, taking him to meetings with senators. Those meetings typically are one-on-one in terms of cabinet appointments. They go meet with specific senators who are key to voting. In this case, both J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth, their choice for Secretary of Defense, were both up there with J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance sort of taking them around Capitol Hill.
Also, some news related to Trump's mass deportation plan. Texas Land Commissioner Dawn Buckingham is offering the incoming Trump administration more than 1,400 acres that the state had purchased along the Texas-Mexico border to be used for the operation. The Texas General Land Office bought the plot of land from a farmer in October, they say, to facilitate Texas's efforts to build a border wall.
Yeah, so in October, as you mentioned, the Texas General Land Office purchased 355,000 acres of land. That's basically half the size of Rhode Island. And of that, 1,400 of the acres has been offered to the federal government. They purchased this so they could build a wall through it because it was privately owned. But they say, if you need to build huge deportation facilities to hold people in, you can do that on this piece of land. It shows that despite Democratic governors in Arizona and California saying, we're not going to cooperate with you as border states, Trump administration, Texas is a state that it looks like Trump will look to rely on for his plan.
Time for the speed read. Let's start with an update on the Laken Riley murder trial from CBS News. Jose Ibarra, an undocumented Venezuelan immigrant, was convicted Wednesday of killing Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student in Georgia. A judge in Georgia found Ibarra guilty of 3 counts of felony murder and counts of malice murder, kidnapping with bodily injury, aggravated assault with intent to rape, and, quote, peeping Tom.
Jill, in the defense there, the defense attorney tried to argue literally in court in his closing arguments. He was short, he was chubby, she was fast, she could have outrun him. Again, they believe that there wasn't enough evidence, even though there's a lot of DNA evidence. And it took the judge less than 20 minutes to come back to court and announce his verdict here. They argued, the prosecutors, that he went hunting for women on the University of Georgia campus there. That's when he came across Riley on her morning run. And this case has become a flashpoint in the illegal immigration debate during the State of the Union earlier this year, during the presidential debate, because Ibarra entered the U.S. illegally 2 years ago. He was detained twice over the last couple of years, but was allowed to stay in the country to pursue his immigration case. He has now been sentenced to life without parole. As for questions from some of you on Instagram as to why he's not just being deported, there is no guarantee, A, that Venezuela would take him, given the lack of a relationship the U.S. government has with the Venezuelan government. And then even if they did take him, no guarantee that they would even hold him behind bars and ensure a sentence would be served. So if you want justice served in this case, they will be keeping him life in prison here in the U.S.
From Semaphore, a U.S. congressional commission this week proposed a Manhattan Project-style initiative to fund the development of AI. The government's goal, AI systems that will be as smart or smarter than humans as the U.S. faces intensifying competition with China over advanced technologies. How likely this is will largely depend on the incoming administration. In a report published on Tuesday, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which is a congressional advisory body, recommended that lawmakers create a Manhattan Project-like program aimed at, quote, racing to and acquiring an artificial general intelligence capability, or AGI. Over the summer, the America First Policy Institute, which is headed by ex-Trump official Larry Kudlow, floated the idea, and similar concepts have also popped up within Project 2025.
So when we talk about Manhattan Project, for those of you who didn't see Oppenheimer, the film, or are less familiar with World War II history, that was the U.S. government project to build the first atom bomb before any other country. And the U.S. succeeded. The idea here is that artificial intelligence is so important, and like we were back then in a race for an atom bomb against Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, this go around, we're in a race against China and others to develop the best and most robust artificial intelligence. So this is a belief among AI companies that the national government is going to get involved in this, given how vital it's going to be. We're still in the very beginning stages. By the way, I should remind all of you, how do we have the internet? DARPA, the U.S. government organization, the Pentagon, effectively helped develop the first internet with universities. So when it comes to these huge technologies...
I thought Al Gore developed the internet.
He did. He helped it. 90s, the 90s called. They want their joke back, Jill.
Moshe, once you started with the turkey song from Adam Sandler, I'm stuck in the 90s, as we know.
Yeah, Jill's stuck 30 years ago. We'll bring her back there later on this day in history. But key developments have come with government investment. And so the idea here is AI is so important that the government will have to get involved here. Companies like Meta, OpenAI, Microsoft, and you've been hearing about him lately, Elon Musk, all involved in AI. Right now, Elon Musk has developed something called XAI because he puts the letter X in everything because he loves the letter X. And he is obviously very close with President-elect Trump. So the idea here is that Elon Musk play a role in this. Obviously, there's some ethics and business issues there, given that he's working on it privately. We'll see how that works out. But ultimately, it looks like this is one of those issues that Democrats and Republicans may agree on, especially vis-a-vis China here. And so we'll watch to see how much the federal government gets involved here when it comes to AI to ensure the U.S. stays ahead of the game.
From NBC News, after a 118-day trial, 45 pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong were sentenced to jail this week. They were charged with conspiracy to commit subversion for organizing an unofficial primary election in 2020. Authorities say their activities violated a new national security law that went into effect in 2020 aimed at preventing violent protests. The trial of the Hong Kong 47, as they've come to be known, marked the largest single use of the controversial NSL, which China had imposed on Hong Kong shortly after the pro-democracy protests back in 2019. The law has been criticized by foreign governments as preventing political dissent and curtailing freedom of speech. The activists put together the primary in order to support pro-democracy candidates in the upcoming election for the Hong Kong legislature.
Yeah, they basically were trying to continue to have the robust democracy that Hong Kong had not so long ago. Some background here. Hong Kong was under British control for just over 150 years until there was an agreement between the United Kingdom and China in the late 90s to effectively hand Hong Kong back over to China. Now, as part of that agreement, the UK and the West said, hey, China, part of this deal is you got to let Hong Kong be Hong Kong. They're effectively, very Western in their approach on things, civil rights, freedoms, freedom of the press, all these things that sometimes we take for granted here in the West. And China said, sure. Well, it wasn't very long before China started to crack down on Hong Kong, not allow the dissent that Hong Kong had been used to. And some people fought back, including a number of journalists and politicians here. And really, over the course of the last decade, you've seen China really crack down on Hong Kong and say, no, you're basically like the rest of China, and you will follow the rules, and there will be no dissent, and there will be no democracy. And so they're looking to send this group to jail. They're trying to set an example here, saying, no, none of that anymore. This is China. We should note that Hong Kong used to have a more independent We should note that Hong Kong also used to have a more independent judiciary. Now you have 3 judges who are handpicked by the Chinese government that are managing this case. Both Trump and Biden have called this out, saying this is unacceptable. And it does come as there's a trial for the former publisher of a pro-democracy newspaper there, a guy named Jimmy Lai. He's accused of trying to get U.S. officials to intervene in Chinese matters. He had just asked then Vice President Pence and U.S. officials for support for protests in Hong Kong. China said no. They're now accusing him of trying to get the U.S. to basically help an insurrection inside China. Jimmy Lai, faces life in prison here. His pro-democracy newspaper has been shut down. Again, the message from China is that, no democratic dissent will be tolerated in the country here on out.
And finally, from People, Arthur Fromer of Fromer's Guidebooks and Fromers.com passed away at the age of 95. He rose to fame in the tourism industry after publishing Europe on $5 a Day back in 1957, and later his namesake travel guides. His daughter Pauline remembered his life as remarkable, adding that he democratized travel, showing average Americans how anyone can afford to travel widely and better understand the world. She said he published the revolutionary Europe on $5 a Day, the first in the Fromer's Guidebook series that continues publication today. He was a prolific writer, TV and radio host, and speaker. And in 1997, he was the founding editor of Fromers.com, one of the world's first digital travel information sites. And Pauline says she's going to work to keep his legacy alive as she works with a team of travel journalists.
By the way, I had to listen to interviews with him to make sure we figured out how to pronounce his name, because I was calling it Fromers for years, or Fromers, wasn't quite sure. He called himself Fromer, so we're going with Fromer here. And the backstory is he goes to law school and then gets sent as a GI abroad during the time of the Korean War, but he's sent to Europe during that time, which he says he was very happy about. And he was struck by the fact that his fellow soldiers were scared to travel around Europe, didn't know the currency, didn't know where they would stay. And so for his last couple of weeks there, he's like, let me make a guide. A basic guide for you guys, so you can travel around Europe. While we're posted here, we should see Europe. And so that's where he got the idea for a guide, because he comes back to the US, comes back to practice law, and then gets a letter saying, your guides are selling out here. He says, wow, maybe there's something here with these guides. So he basically turns a guide for his fellow GIs into the Europe at $5 a day. By the way, that would be nice. By 2007, it was Europe at $95 a day. I imagine that's probably doubled or more at this point, Jill. And his travel tips, though, were focused on budget travelers and saving tourist money. He's not taking you to the five-star hotels. At least that wasn't his priority. And it wasn't just Europe. It expanded around the world. In fact, his second book was New York on $5 a day, and so on and so forth. And then the Frommer's Guides. And he was always a believer in budget travel. He said that budget travelers not only did it cheaper, but they learned more, enjoyed more, gave Europeans a better account of the American national character. He feels like that allowed for more interaction there. And so these are among his rules, Joel, going back. Never travel first class. If going by boat, consider freighters. Pack lightly enough to be free from porters, taxi drivers, and bellhops. Stay in pensions, or I guess...
Is it like a hostel?
Yeah, like hostels, like previous, or Airbnbs. Take the room without the bath. So he was all about interacting with people. Eat in restaurants that only the locals go to. Try to engage locals in conversation. Study the maps. Take public transportation. He had a warning for Venice. Stay away from the gondolas. They cost almost $3 an hour, was his note from several decades ago. Obviously much more there. But that was Frommer. He's like, listen, and I think there's a point here, Jill, I remember backpacking Europe with a friend when we graduated college in 2004. And that's when we didn't have smartphones yet. Text messaging was still new, but too expensive to do abroad. You had to go get a SIM card. I remember having to go to an internet cafe to try to figure out where we were staying next. And it led to dealing with locals, looking at a map, having to talk to someone at the train station to figure out what train to take, etc. And while technology makes things much easier, literally now you can hold up your phone and it will do live translation for you through Google Translate. So just have them speak whatever language, and it'll translate into English. But there was something to learn the language, learn the words, not being able to do everything on your own and having to interact with locals. And so Arthur Frommer, you had it right.
I'm down with all of his advice, except for taking the room without the bathroom. No thanks. I need a bathroom.
Especially with kids.
No, even by myself, I need a bathroom in my room.
Get it? All right. Note to Frommer. I imagine in his guides he has options with actual bathrooms. All right. On this day in history, we begin on this November 21st. Beyond the fact that it's my half birthday, did we mention that at the top? On this day in 1783. The first crewed hot air balloon flight was made in Paris on this day. So happy 241st birthday to the hot air balloon. On this day, we go to the 20th century now. On this day in 1934, 90 years ago today, a young Ella Fitzgerald wins amateur night at the Apollo. She's 17 years old. She was orphaned at the age of 15. She was a high school dropout, a ward of New York State, and then she makes her way to the Apollo in 1934 with two of her girlfriends. And she says that it was a bet. Singing was a bet. They put their names in. They never thought they would get the call. And lo and behold, she sings and becomes a jazz legend shortly thereafter.
It's like the original American Idol.
There you go, on a bet. Speaking of folks who never thought they would make it big, Sylvester Stallone. On this day in 1976, Rocky premieres in New York City. At the time, Stallone was a struggling actor, and he wrote the screenplay for Rocky and insisted that he play the lead. He was really struggling at the time. Of course, the movie makes him a big star. He becomes Sly Stallone. They've now made umpteenth versions of Rocky since then. And that first film would win him a couple Oscars. All right, we end here with some music history. On this day in 1960, George Harrison of the Beatles was deported by Germany. In the early days, the Beatles were playing in Hamburg, Germany, and they were there in the summer of 1960. But George Harrison was actually the youngest member of the band. He was only 17 at the time, which means it was not legal for him to perform in the country. He broke German law. They kicked him out. The Beatles would still figure it out and become successful. And Jill knew it. On this day, 32 years ago, on Saturday Night Live, Adam Sandler sings the Thanksgiving song on Weekend Update.
And Moshe, I just watched the video on YouTube, and Adam Sandler, he's such a baby. He looks so young, and he's really stayed with us. He's still very much part of pop culture and has all these deals with Netflix to make movies. And just what a baby face there, singing about turkey on SNL.
Yeah, he was 26 at the time. He's now 58. To age yourself, fellow elder millennials. And Kevin Nealon, who was hosting Weekend Update, now in his 70s. But a classic Adam Sandler song. And I remember listening to his comedy album with his songs with my friends in junior high and high school.
Most with lyrics like, turkey for me, turkey for you. Let's eat the turkey in my big brown shoe. Can't beat it.
Jill, the lyrics get much more aggressive in the subsequent verses, not family-friendly verses.
Do they?
Wrap the turkey up in aluminum foil. My brother likes to masturbate with baby oil.
Okay. So my husband would walk around the house singing the brown shoe line. Yeah. I never really watched the whole thing.
No, if you keep going, there's like stories about Mike Tyson and VD. You got some stuff.
Oh, Adam Sandler, very naughty. As I'm saying, he has a baby face. Oh, he's my goodness.
It's Saturday Night Live, you know?
Oh my God, that is so funny. Okay, everybody, we gotta go. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Review us, follow us in the App Store. We'd appreciate it.
See you guys tomorrow.